So, without further ado, let's talk about saving the drops. So, for anyone who just entered, my name is Jackie Leibowitz. I am the Water Resources Program Assistant at Aquifers Extension Sarasota County, and my email is up on the screen. So today, our plan's pretty simple. We're going to talk about where your water comes from, why we want to conserve, and how we can conserve our water resources. All right, bear with me. Took my PowerPoint about 10 minutes to boot up. I think it's time for a replacement computer. So let's go ahead and use the app instead. Thank you all for your patience with my technical difficulties this morning. I got here 30 minutes early, hoping that it wouldn't happen, but sure enough, it did. So while this is going full screen, I'd like to ask the audience, what does water mean to you? I know it's kind of a big, broad question, but what does it mean to you to protect our water resources? Does anyone want to?
Water is life.
Water is life, isn't it? I mean, where would we be without water? For drinking, for bathing, for doing our dishes, for pretty much every aspect of our life, we need water to survive. But beyond that, Sarasota is surrounded by water, right? Especially Longboat Key. So we have to be really conscious of how we use our water and how we treat our local water resources. All right, excellent. So let's get into it. So we're going to talk about potable water and where it comes from. So is anyone familiar with the word potable? Some call it potable. So potable water is essentially that water that I just described that we use for drinking, bathing, that water that's coming inside the home. And it's pretty much essential to our day-to-day activities. So it's important to think about where this potable water comes from in the environment. So I love this graphic up on the left because it really showcases just how much water we have available to use on a daily basis. That's usable for fresh, potable water. So all water on Earth, if you break it down into some simple circles, about 97% of it is saline or salt water. And then that leaves about 3% as fresh water. So 3%, okay, that's pretty workable. That's a lot of water. But then that gets broken up even further, and the majority of it, so just under 70% of that fresh water, is trapped in ice caps and glaciers. So that is not water that we can readily use for our potable water supply. So that leaves us about 30% of our potable or fresh water as groundwater, and then a little teensy tiny percent as surface water. And what does that surface water look like? I think a lot of us really think that our water comes from these lakes and rivers and streams, but a lot of it really does come from groundwater. So 0.3%, you can break that up into those lakes, rivers, swamps, and some of those other fresh water sources. But groundwater is where we're going to get the majority of our drinking water from in the state of Florida, but just generally speaking across the country. So I love this quote. If you could put all the water on Earth in a gallon jug, the quantity readily available for human use would be less than 1 tablespoon. So that really puts things into perspective. That's a really small amount of available fresh water. So we talked about Florida's groundwater and that being a big source of our potable water supply. So this is what that groundwater kind of looks like, right? This is an aquifer system. And what an aquifer is essentially these Swiss cheese rocks, I like to call them, that are very much underground where our water passes through the earth, the soil, and percolates eventually into this layer of limestone, which is a porous rock that's made up of skeletons of corals, plankton, algae, etc. Over time, it builds up and creates these really porous layers of the earth, and it's a really great filtration system for our groundwater, right? So it comes from the sky, comes from runoff, ends up sinking into those permeable surfaces where it can, and then it trickles down very slowly into that aquifer system. And our aquifers are very productive in Florida, especially the Floridan aquifer. So let's go ahead and break down those layers a little bit more. So here is a map of Florida's primary aquifers. So we have that surficial, which is kind of a surface level aquifer at the top. So that doesn't go down very far. A lot of people have wells that pull from the surficial aquifer at home. There is the intermediate depth aquifer. So you can see that's a smaller area, but it does capture part of Sarasota and goes down a bit south in the state. And then the really big heavy hitter aquifer, which is generally on the deeper side, is the Floridan aquifer system, which is a little bit more shallow in North Florida, but tends to get deeper in South Florida. So, the Floridan aquifer actually provides drinking water for nearly 10 million people. So that's a lot of people. And this water is also very important for aiding our thriving agricultural industry. So our aquifers are important. And in Florida specifically, about 95% of the water that we use as potable water is coming from that groundwater resource in those aquifers. And in its natural state, that groundwater is generally clear, clean, and easy and inexpensive to make suitable for drinking. And you may be wondering how we get our groundwater in Sarasota County, so I'll show you. But it is after it travels through all those layers and that limestone ends up pretty clean. So in Sarasota County, we have a number of wells set up to kind of siphon that water from the aquifers, much like using a straw. So you can kind of see here these straw-like structures that are dipping down into the ground at different layers of our aquifers. So we have the superficial here that we talked about kind of at the surface. There's the intermediate, more so in the middle. And then here's the upper Floridan aquifer, just going under 400 feet. So a little on the deeper side. But you'll notice that a lot of that water, those arrows, are pointing from Highlands County. So this is where we get our recharge for our aquifers. And basically what a recharge means for aquifers is just refilling that water supply. So over time, through rain and other means of water transport, that water will percolate through these layers and eventually end up in these well systems where they're being drawn up and distributed throughout the county. So this is a little pie chart that shows you where our water comes from in unincorporated Sarasota County. So it's kind of broken up into big pieces here. So we have about just over 15% coming from Manatee County, about 20% coming from the Carlton Junior Water Treatment Facility. We have a little bit from Venice Gardens and the University well fields, and then about 50%, interestingly enough, of our water comes from Peace River. Now, in the town of Longboat Key, to my understanding, you guys get most of your water from the town itself mixed with Manatee County's water. So it's purchased wholesale and then distributed to residents of Longboat Key. So we talked a little bit about where our water comes from, so you guys have a bigger picture of where our water comes from, but let's talk a little bit about why it's important to think about water conservation. So this is a question I get a lot, and I mean a lot. And that is, with so much development, do we have enough water for everyone moving to Florida? And there's a lot of people moving to Florida. The last statistic I saw was about 1,000 people per day to the state. So we have people coming in, and Sarasota County itself takes the number 14 slot for most populated counties. To put it in perspective, Sarasota County itself, or not Sarasota, sorry, Florida has 67 counties. So we're at number 14 of 67. So we can kind of see this boom in population reflected in our water statistics. So in Florida, most of our water is going to agriculture and public supply. So those are those two big lines at the bottom of our water bottle here. And you can kind of see how those numbers are gradually changing. So in 2020, it was a little closer to 41 million gallons per day. And then it's getting a little closer, projected to 42 million gallons per day. And so it might seem like a very small increase, but that still is showing an increasing demand for that potable water. And we need to make sure that we can meet that demand. Otherwise, we run into an issue of shortage. So this is another fun map that, well, arguably not very fun, but it is informational, that shows essentially where those shortages might pop up. And this is something that's put out by the FDEP, so the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. They do these reports fairly frequently where they show where that shortage might be and some ways to help meet those demands. So what we're looking at here, these blue circles kind of indicate, based on size, just how much demand we're going to have. And then these little orange slices and some of these circles indicate a need that needs to be met. And so those water resources have to come from somewhere. It's kind of one of those things where those are our shortages, those little orange slices. And so we have to figure out how to make it all blue, essentially. And so by 2040, the projected statewide shortfall overall, so kind of crunching up all those little orange wedges, is about 337 million gallons per day. So that is a fair bit of water, if you ask me. And there are a number of strategies we can use to help meet that shortage. So number one, and this is what we're going to focus on today, is water conservation, right? So it's just using less water to begin with. It's inexpensive to basically free, and it's a very easy thing to do passively. And we'll talk more about some of those water conservation strategies in a bit. Another thing that Sarasota County is really pushing for is the use of reclaimed water. So that is treated wastewater that basically is used for irrigation in the yard, for use in cooling towers, wetland restoration, lots of big, heavy, water-intensive projects. Now, if we have a surplus of water at a certain point in the year, like in the rainy season, we can take some of that water and inject it into wells and recover it later when we need it more. Or the same thing applies for some of our surface water bodies, just using them as temporary storage for that water. And then another thing that's kind of becoming more popular in certain areas, especially by the coast, where you have kind of a higher chance of saltwater intrusion in your potable water supply, which just means your water is getting saltier because you're taking too much out of the well. You can treat brackish groundwater to be of drinking water quality. So removing some of that salt from the water, which is very much a technology that exists. Is it cheap? Not so much. So we certainly want to make use of all these strategies where we can. But like I said, we're going to focus on water conservation because that's the easiest way an individual can make an impact on our future water supply. So to talk about how to conserve water, it's really helpful to investigate where we're using that water at home, right? So I'm going to ask you guys, where do you think we use the most water inside the home? What appliance uses the most water inside the home? Smart cookie. So what about outside the home? What do we think uses the most water? 10 out of 10. You got it. So irrigation is the biggest overall water user, and statistics currently state that about 50% or more of the home's total water use throughout the year is being used on sprinkler systems, if there is a sprinkler system present. So that's a lot of water. That's 50% or more of our total use throughout the year on lawns. So when we manage our irrigation systems, not only are we saving water, but we are creating a healthier landscape as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about some things you can do, but just to reiterate, overwatering is not worth doing. It wastes a really important and limited resource. We saw that slide, right, where our fresh water was broken down into just a little slice of what's available on Earth. And so we have to be conscious of how much we're using, especially in these large water use systems. When we're putting down too much water on our lawns, we're making our plants more prone to disease and pest outbreaks, which nobody wants big patches of brown on their lawn, to my knowledge. Beyond that, we're also kind of decreasing our grass's ability to withstand drought and other conditions in the landscape. And we're making that grass want more water because it's getting used to that irrigation schedule. So it's also leaching important nutrients from the soil when you're watering too much before the plants get a chance to absorb those nutrients. If you're just watering and watering and watering, those nutrients are going to get leached out or washed out of the soil. And beyond that, those nutrients and maybe any fertilizer or pesticide you slap down on your lawn can get carried away through runoff and end up in our local water bodies, which are all very much connected. So I always like to kind of talk about this overwatering issue in terms of cats. So you can go ahead, raise your hand if you have a cat at home. Anyone a cat owner? All right. Yep. So, cats are very routine oriented, right? So let's say you feed your cat 2 times a day in the morning and then in the evening. So you're going away for 2 weeks. You hire a babysitter. I say babysitter in that we know cats are very much our babies. And that babysitter thinks Mr. Freckles is so cute and that he deserves a lunch. So all of a sudden it went from 2 meal times to 3 meal times, and you're doing this for every day, 2 weeks. What's going to happen when you come home? What's going to happen around lunchtime? I think you're going to start hearing a lot of meows because that cat got used to getting lunch. And so I like to bring this up when it comes to grass, because grass is very much the same way as are many plants. They're very routine oriented. And if you are just watering your grass over and over again, what's going to happen when all of a sudden you decide that you want to reduce your irrigation really significantly? Your grass is going to get stressed out, just like your cat would get stressed out when it stops getting lunch all of a sudden. It's just got shorter roots. It doesn't have a chance to really explore the soil to find more water that may be stored there. And beyond that, it's using all of that water that it's getting to kind of grow upwards, so you have to mow it more often. So you're creating a really high maintenance landscape when you don't water efficiently. And so the rule of thumb is trying to have about 50% or less of your landscape be that high water use zone. So that's grass, right? Grass needs to have that supplemental irrigation or watering throughout the year versus maybe a landscape bed that's around your home that's nicely mulched, that has native or Florida-friendly plants that are acclimated to the local climate. That's going to use a lot less water and be a lot lower maintenance overall, less pesticides, less fertilizers, because again, these are plants that are accustomed to being here. So trying to make most of your landscape these kinds of plants versus just focusing on grass is a really good way to cut down on that irrigation. So we'll talk more about irrigation strategies in a bit, but I want to revisit our water use in the home. So you were absolutely right in that our toilets use the most water. So right here in this pie chart, you can see about 24% of our average water use throughout the year is just on flushing toilets. So those toilets do have the capacity to use a lot. Following that, we have our showers, we have faucets, our clothes washers, but this last statistic here, other than the mysterious other at 8%, is leaks at 12%. So can you imagine about 12% of the water you're using in the home is just being wasted through leaks? That makes me so sad, and I know it's very easy to have happen, so there's no blame game here. It's just a matter of, wow, that's a lot of water that we should be saving instead of wasting, because there really is no benefit to it. In fact, it can cause a lot of harm if you have leaks happening in certain places of the home. It could warp your floors. It could stress out your equipment. So it's really important to make sure to take care of those leaks. And I always like to start there for our water conservation tactics, because again, it's not something that we're really thinking about a lot, but we want to make sure that we are taking care of those leaks, not only for ourselves, but for conserving those water resources and being responsible with our water. So just a quick little checklist for saving water outside. So I mentioned I'd share some quick tips with you about your irrigation system and some things you can do to just cut back on your water use. It's pretty easy going. Like, you can set your landscape up for success and then pretty much just step away and have already saved tens of thousands of gallons of water. So you always want to make sure that your rain sensor is working. Has anyone heard of a rain sensor? Does that sound kind of familiar in the audience? No? So a lot of people don't know about them, but if you have an automatic irrigation system at home, you're required to have a rain shutoff device. This is Florida statute. Like, you need to have a working rain sensor or other rain shutoff device. And what those devices do is when you get enough rain, it's going to detect that water and shut your system off until conditions become dry again and you should irrigate. So it's a really nice way to just check and make sure that you're not overwatering, because irrigation is a supplement to that rainfall, not the other way around. So I already mentioned this, but you want to pick the right plants for your landscape because you're going to be using a lot less resources that way. And we're very lucky in Florida, especially in this part of Florida. We have some amazing plants to select from. And I encourage you all, and you're welcome to tag me down at the end of the presentation. There is a really awesome guide to plant selection in Florida that was put out by the Florida Yard and Neighbors group. And it shows you a breakdown of all the different plants you can pick from and where they do best in the landscape, what kind of wildlife or pollinators they might attract, and what conditions they need to be successful. But it is a thick book. And so these are all plants that are going to do really well in a Florida landscape. And you can get one for yourself completely for free, just shipped to your house by SwiftMud. So that's a really nice service they provide. But I recommend just going online, using your extension resources, seeing what might be a good fit for your landscape. So beyond picking the right plants, making sure to follow watering restrictions. So they're put there in place for a reason, and that's to help conserve our resources, but also to put less strain on the utility. So it's really important, especially with your irrigation systems, to have them set at the right time, the right day. If you're curious at all about what those restrictions might look like, we have a really great brochure right by the door that you can pick up, and that'll show you exactly what those restrictions look like per area in Sarasota County. So it's important to keep up with that. Make sure that you change things in accordance with those restrictions, because sometimes they can change. I know in unincorporated Sarasota County, January 1st, we had a new set of watering restrictions to follow. But just always check and make sure you have the right programming on your controller, which is going to be what turns your irrigation system on. You can use micro irrigation, also known as drip irrigation, or water by hand. So this is a nice tactic for maybe watering some of those landscape beds if they do need a little bit of water during periods of drought or irregular dryness. So that's a pretty easy thing to set up. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it can have a really big impact. In fact, one statistic that I like to share is that drip irrigation, like any kind of emitter that can classify as drip or micro irrigation, uses a maximum of 30 gallons per hour. So the typical rotor or sprinkler head can use about 180 gallons per hour. So that is a huge difference. And again, you don't need sprinkler irrigation for those landscape beds. It's not really helping the plants if you're picking the right plants. So you can also check for wasted water, just making sure you every once in a while go out, maybe while your irrigation system is running, or just put it on manually. It's pretty easy. If you just look at your user guide, it'll show you how to turn your system on manually for a couple minutes just to check things out. but you would be shocked at just how many little invisible leaks or unused heads or other issues might be in your irrigation system if you haven't checked it. I speak from experience. I do irrigation evaluations as part of my job, and that is just essentially running a wet check for residents in Sarasota County to see where they could be saving water. I cannot tell you how many random leaks I've found in the wildest of places. And I'm not talking about little drips. I'm talking about geysers coming out of the ground. So it's really important that you check your irrigation to make sure you're not, unintentionally putting a few geysers in your landscape every week. So mulch your plant beds. This is, in my opinion, a no-brainer. Not only are you protecting any drip systems that you might set up, you're protecting the plant roots, you're also helping discourage some weedy growth, and it's going to retain moisture in the soil so that you don't have to worry about watering as often. You can put a rain barrel in your landscape. That's always a good practice if your HOA allows it. You can also make them very nice and decorative, and it's kind of a nice free source of water when you're getting a lot of rain. So practicing good mowing is another way to save water in the landscape. The University of Florida recommends just removing a third of that grass blade's height, and any more than that can be stressful to the plant because the plant needs its grass blades to photosynthesize or make food for itself. So if you're cutting down a good portion of that leaf, it's going to have less food and be more stressed and potentially get more prone to disease and pests. So watching the weather is another really important thing. So beyond making sure you have a functional rain sensor in your irrigation system, just making sure that you're turning off your system if you're getting enough rain, or if there is a really big storm forecast in the next 24 hours, just go ahead and turn it off and let nature do the work for you. But that way you're not doubling down on your water, because the most frustrating thing to see is going through a neighborhood at night after it's just been raining all day and you see the sprinklers going off and watering the concrete. I hate it. So do your best to manage your irrigation systems as well as you can. And keep in mind the irrigation evaluations that we provide through the Extension Office, they are free to anyone in that Sarasota County border. So if you need someone to come and check out your system, please consider me. My business cards are on the table as well. So when we're managing our irrigation, not only are we saving heaps of water, but we're also preventing some of that polluted runoff. So a lot of people put fertilizer down on their lawns, and you got to make sure that you don't do that right before a rain or right before you just irrigate your entire lawn, because that fertilizer needs time to be absorbed by the plant. So we really need to fertilize responsibly and also make sure that we're irrigating responsibly when we're using fertilizer, because otherwise it's going straight into our local water bodies and eventually may make its way into the bay. So enough about irrigation. Let's talk about a little more in the home, what you can do. So we're going to do some quick tips, get them out of the way. This is mostly pretty intuitive stuff, but I've actually looked at this list and tried a few things that I never really thought before, and I've found that it really is helping over time with my water bill and my water consumption. So one thing you can do is install and use those low flow shower heads and water flow restrictors or faucet aerators for your tap. They're pretty cheap little pieces of equipment, but what they do is they kind of use air to bulk out the water, but then you're using less gallons per minute. So it might not be a huge difference. It's nothing you really feel, but it adds up over time because you're using your faucet probably every day, right? I know I do. So another thing you can do is take shorter showers instead of taking a bath. Remember, it was about 20% of your water use in the home per year is spent on showering. So I love this idea of just making a short little playlist, about 5 to 10 minutes, and just when the music's over, after you're jamming out to your favorite songs, you can just get ready to turn off the shower. So another thing you can do is install a water efficient toilet. I understand that's not something everybody can just go out and spend money on a new toilet the next day. But if you happen to have a toilet that's malfunctioning, that needs to be replaced, really considering something that's going to be a low flush toilet is a good idea, because it's going to save you money over time, and it's just the environmentally friendly thing to do. So turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth or shaving, again, it's one of those more intuitive things, but it really adds up over time, especially if you're using 1 gallon to 2 gallons a minute on that faucet, right? So scraping your plate instead of rinsing it before you put it in the dishwasher is a really easy way to save some water. And again, you don't need to double wash it. That dishwasher is going to use less water than if you're washing by hand, and it's going to take care of that mess. So just be sure to scrape and then put in the dishwasher, and you're going to have less food and other gnarly substances getting into your drain, which I don't know if you guys know this, but you definitely don't want to put a whole lot of food scraps, if any, down your drain, especially any fats, oils, greases. That's going to clog up your pipes, and it'll be very expensive to repair. So running the dishwasher or washing machine when you have a full load of either laundry or dishes, that's a very good thing to do. It's going to be less work for you, and it's also going to use less water. So another thing to add to that is just reusing your towels, your bath towels, when you can, a few times. They're not really that dirty, and they can add a lot of bulk to your laundry load. So again, it's just a small thing you can do that adds up over time. And that big one, right, that we mentioned before is getting your water leaks fixed. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So you can find leaks pretty much anywhere in or outside the home. So the rule of thumb is if it uses water, it can leak. So just being aware that it's a problem that could be happening at any point in time, not to make you paranoid, but it's just good to consistently kind of check your appliances and check your home to see if there's anything out of place, any damp areas, dripping, etc., and that can help you cut down on those leaks. So we talked about toilets using the most water in the home, but did you know they're also usually the culprit for water leaks in the home? So I'm not trying to rag on toilets here. We need them, but they do cause some issues. So with leaks, what happens oftentimes is that flapper that you use to flush the toilet gets worn out. So it's this little piece of rubber that attaches to your little flush lever, and over time, as any kind of rubbery substance that's constantly getting exposed to water may do, it hardens and it loses that seal. So it needs to be replaced. And a lot of people don't know that, or they don't hear that their toilet is leaking, and all of a sudden they get a really high water bill and they're very confused because leaky toilets can waste 200 gallons of water per day. I find that to be just gnarly. To put it in perspective, the average bathtub is probably about 42 gallons. So you're just losing bathtubs every day by your toilet constantly running. So you can replace the flapper if you suspect a leak and it's running. If it's not so obvious, you can do a simple dye test. That's getting some food coloring or some of those toilet dye tabs, putting them in the toilet tank, so that top part of the toilet, waiting about 20, 30 minutes without using it. And then if you're seeing that color transferred to the bowl of the toilet, that means that water is running and you do have a leak, so you have to get it repaired. And again, most of the time you can do it yourself by replacing the flapper or the flush valve. They have these kits you can get, but if that's not the case, then you got to work with a plumber to make sure that gets fixed. If it's not coming from your toilet, you can check your bathroom while you're there, look at your faucets, shower heads, and the tub under the sink. Sometimes it's not necessarily a leak, it's just maybe a knob wasn't put tight enough. So it's just little drips of water coming out. So that's an easy remedy. Beyond that, checking your laundry room, your clothes washer, your supply line behind the washer. There could be a leak or an issue with the connection there. Checking your utility room or garage. So your water heater or water softener might be leaking. Again, any devices that are using water can leak. So The kitchen is another really important place to check regularly because there's a lot of appliances in the kitchen that use that water. So looking at your faucets, under the sink, your dishwasher, your refrigerator, those are all good places to check. You're listening and looking for drips and checking for any kind of unusually damp areas. That's essentially what's going to tell you if there's a leak. Outdoors, again, those irrigation systems use a lot of water, so making sure to run through and check and make sure that there aren't any leaks going on with your irrigation is crucial. Any kind of spigots or hose bibs, you may, again, have not tightened the connection properly enough. I've done it more times than I can count, unfortunately. So just making sure all your connections are good. If there is a leak there, fixing it as needed. And your swimming pool as well. If you have a swimming pool, just making sure that the fill valve, if you have one, or any other features of the pool are not leaking water. So fixing leaks, really important. Cannot emphasize it enough. And again, if you have leaks in the home, it's estimated that 12% of that water is going toward those leaks. So it's already a huge water saving tactic, and it's very passive. And of course, it's great for your water bill as well. So just to put it in perspective, a little tiny pinhole leak, so 1/32 of an inch, tiny, can waste about 74,000 gallons a year. So even if it seems like a really small, negligible thing, it all really adds up. And I always suggest, if you don't really want to go through that checklist yourself, or you feel a little uncomfortable moving some things around to check for those leaks, get friends or family involved. Make it a treasure hunt. It's like the perfect thing for Easter, right? You can look for eggs, and then you can help me find leaks in my house. So just getting people involved to help out, because again, even if it seems small, it can really make a difference with your water use. So we talked a little bit about water efficient toilets on a previous slide. So there are a ton of different water efficient devices you can get to replace the devices you have in your home already. Again, this isn't something you need to just go out the next day and replace all your appliances with something that's considered water efficient, but this is just something to keep in mind next time your toilet breaks or your dishwasher breaks and you need to get something new. So you want to opt for something that's water efficient. And if you were to have all water efficient devices in your home, so a shower head, a bathroom faucet, so those faucet aerators, low flow toilet, kitchen faucet, dishwasher, washing machine, so all these different things, you'd be saving 11,542 gallons of water a year, and you're not even doing anything. You're just using your appliances. So it's a really nice passive way to save a lot of water. And so when you're going out to purchase those water efficient devices, this is the label you want to look for. So this is the WaterSense label. This is an initiative put together by the Environmental Protection Agency. Essentially, to meet the WaterSense criteria, your product has to use at least 20% less water than the standard product on the market without sacrificing any quality, or basically it's got to perform the same but use less water. And so you won't really feel a difference, but you are making a difference. And they have a list of some of those WaterSense registered products on their website. So if you go to epa.gov/WaterSense, you'll be able to do a little more research, maybe before you go to the store, to pick up one of those water efficient devices. So beyond some of those larger things, right, like the toilet and the dishwasher, there are a few small things you can get to also help cut down on your water use. So one of them is a toilet dam. So again, the toilets use a lot of water, right? So toilet dams actually help save about half a gallon per flush if used properly. I will just issue a short disclaimer. If you already have a very low flow toilet, you're probably not going to be able to use the toilet dam because then there's not enough water to flush. But if you have an older toilet model and you're not yet ready to replace it with a low flush toilet, you can try out the toilet dam. It's essentially like a plastic bag, and you fill it with water, you put it in your tank, and it displaces some of that water. So every time you fill up your tank after you flush, it's going to go to that same line, but some of that water won't be used because it's being occupied by the toilet dam. So it's just taking up some space and displacing some of that water, about a half a gallon's worth. So it really adds up over time. The faucet aerators and the low flow shower heads, we talked about them before. Pretty easy going. Most of the time it's just a matter of taking off your current shower head and replacing it with a low flow shower head. You just got to make sure you have the right attachments. And then the faucet aerators, you just put on the end of your faucet, and they're already good to go and ready to work. And that'll save you a lot of water over time. The recirculation pump is another thing you can consider investing in. And the benefit of the recirculation pumps, basically what it does is it takes the unused hot water and kind of brings it back directly to the source. So you can have hot showers a lot faster. So that's a nice thing to think about. This isn't really a DIY project. You'd have to get a plumber or technician involved, but it might be worth doing in your home. Again, I love the idea of a hot shower right off the bat. So another thing that you guys can do, and this might be a little surprising to some people, is to drink local to help not only save water, but also keep that plastic out of landfills. So just to put it in perspective, it takes about 1.5 liters of water to produce a half-liter bottle of water. So kind of your standard issue water bottle. And that's not even the water that it takes to fill the water. This is to produce that plastic. So it's about 3 times as much just to make that plastic bottle. And most plastic bottles aren't really getting recycled 100% efficiency. So many of them end up at the landfill, and plastic doesn't really just disintegrate, it doesn't go away. If anything, it'll break down into tiny, tiny little pieces called microplastics. To be a microplastic, it has to be about 5 millimeters or less, size of a pencil eraser. These microplastics are real stinkers because a lot of animals in the marine environment mistake them as food. And if they're eating plastic, they don't really have a lot of room for their actual nutritious diet, so they end up dying of starvation, and it really stinks. It really does. So just drinking from your tap where you can, maybe keeping a pitcher in your fridge, or even just having a filtration system on your refrigerator. Not that you need it, but that's how I get my water every day, is I just put my glass under my little water dispenser and I'm good to go. So there's a lot of ways to drink local, and it's also a great way to support your local utilities. So it's something that I just recommend right off the bat is be responsible. It's a lot cheaper too to drink tap instead of buying water bottles every week. So, it's fine too in emergency scenarios. Have a stack of water bottles on hand. I know we've had a few disasters in the past few years. It's important that your health comes first and your safety comes first, but on a day-to-day basis, just switching from bottled water consumption to drinking local is a really responsible choice for both you and for the planet. So I just want to kind of wrap up before I open the floor to questions to say, conservation counts for all kinds of water. I've had a lot of folks come to me thinking, I use well water, so it doesn't really matter. I don't have to pay for it, so I can use as much as I want. All of our water is connected. It really is. The water cycle makes it so that even dinosaur urine from many, many moons ago still exists in some capacity in our water supply. So our water is around, and we need to be sure that we protect it, not only for ourselves and future years, but for upcoming generations. Like our children and children's children need to have access to water, and they need to make sure that they're living comfortably versus just having access to what's necessary. So water conservation is critical. And I know you all have a few tips that you can take home and hopefully start practicing right away, or just keep in the back of your head going forward. So we have a little online course for anyone who's interested. It's free to take. It's self-paced. It's water conservation in Sarasota County. So that course touches on some of the things that I mentioned in today's presentation. And it's just video lectures with the occasional quiz or resource page. So I recommend, if you're interested, to take a picture and you can sign up. And again, just take it at your own pace if you want to learn a little bit more about conserving water locally. And with that, I'll open the floor up to questions. I know that was a lot of information at once. Yeah.
I live in a community back here in Bay Isles.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually on the board for landscaping.
Oh, great. It's a lot of work.
We put in, less than 2 years ago, we worked with Swift Mud.
Yeah.
For their water conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And put in this smart system, okay, where you measure not only rainfall, but
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that we weren't doing exactly what you said, watering
Yeah.
after a rainstorm.
Mm-hmm.
Our well water, the salinity is, we just tested it about a month ago.
Yeah.
1.7.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if, I don't know if you would know.
Mm-mm.
Is, I guess Longboat in particular, is there any thought of looking into the use of, and I know it's not just let's switch to reclaim.
Yeah.
You know, it's a huge process.
It is. It is.
But, because we have a lot of HOAs, we have a lot of commercial property.
Yeah.
You know, this time of year we're so dry.
Yeah.
And reclaimed water seems like a good resource.
Yeah, I cannot speak for Longboat Utilities. Again, it is one of those things where it's a lot of infrastructure, it's a lot of planning and money, and you have to have a lot of community investments and the desire for reclaimed in the landscape. I think it's just a matter of openly communicating, getting as many voices as possible to talk to Longboat Key, seeing if it's a possibility, what some of the costs may be to have it in your community. It's kind of a long, ongoing conversation to have, and there might not be an obvious, easy solution to implement right away. I will say reclaimed in unincorporated Sarasota County, it's huge. It really, the golf courses use it. A lot of residents are being required now to hook up to that reclaimed. And again, it's for that irrigation. So you're not drinking that water, at least not in this point in time. So it's used for that irrigation. But like we talked about 50% of the water that we're using in homes that have those irrigation systems is going straight to the grass. So it's a great resource, absolutely. And again, just having those conversations, not being forceful or being upset about anything, just communicating that this is a need that we have and we would like to see if it's possible to meet that need. Any other questions? Yeah.
Kind of along the same lines.
Mm-hmm.
About the superficial aquifer, is that non-potable water? Is that safe? Is that the one we're using for irrigation?
No, people do use well water that can be taken from the superficial aquifer for their homes. I will say I'm not a well water expert. I've never been on well, but it does kind of have to be treated and monitored by the homeowner or the property owner before it gets consumed. So what can happen though with those wells is saltwater intrusion, which is the issue that we're talking about, where essentially because we're so close to the coast, if we're withdrawing too much water from those wells, if they're attached to the water from the coast, it's going to kind of get sucked on up and then it'll mix and then you have more brackish or high salt content in the water, which makes it not really ideal for drinking or for irrigation because plants can only tolerate so much salt.
That's super interesting. I appreciate what you're saying about everything being interconnected, whether it's using it for if it's surface water,
Yeah.
we're using it for irrigation. Also, you're pulling in salt water, you're causing problems there, and then you get to the point where you can't even use that for that. And then so
Yeah.
for the deeper aquifer, or whatever it happens to be, or then we start treating brackish water.
Yeah. And again, it's really expensive to treat that brackish water, and it's not really something that most homeowners can even think about doing on their property unless they have some extra money and the right people they're connected with to install the system. So, yeah.
California was working on something. They've got a basically desalination plant, so they're pulling water right out of the ocean. And I don't even know how expensive that would be.
Yeah.
A lot of solar panels, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I love that solar energy. I'm hoping that's contributing a bit. So you had a question in the front?
Yeah. When I moved here last April, I'm full time, and shortly after I moved here, there was a sprinkler malfunction. Not on our property in the community I live in, but a couple of properties down. And it was a geyser, like you said, all day long, every day, ran down the road. Every day. I told our manager about it, and it took him a while to figure out what to do, and it went on for a month. And I know other people out there walking knew it too. Who should I have told?
That's a good question. Again, I can't speak for Longboat Key. I'll try to get that information for you because every utilities kind of has its own system of dealing with water restriction violations or just issues with the irrigation systems. But I know there is a place to report it for unincorporated Sarasota County. So there must be some kind of equivalent system in place, or maybe it's in development for responding to those violations. But a lot of the time, and it's really sad to say, there's just such a lack of manpower, of people to be able to enforce those restrictions, because a lot of the time it's happening everywhere, in small or large capacities. And it would take a huge team of people to be able to respond to those problems right away and take care of them, which is sad to say. We'd love it if it could just be handled immediately. I think, in my opinion, the best way to go about it is just communicating directly with the property owner and educating them when possible. I know it's not always a possibility, but having that conversation saying, hey, you have a really big leak happening right on your property, I would consider maybe just shutting your system off until you can get it looked at. Or maybe it's just one of the zones that can be turned off, so it's not a huge change to their routine. But yeah, it's tricky. I wish we had some irrigation superheroes who could just run the streets and take care of things immediately. But yeah, there's kind of a lack of support for some of those things.
I had no idea who owned the community, who the manager
Yeah.
was. And I don't think because it was, you could tell what property it was on, but it was actually running down the street between the properties.
So more of a communal area, maybe, or...
Well, the sprinkler was actually between the highway and the driveway of the property.
Oh, okay.
But it wasn't highway property.
Yeah.
Yeah. Community. But, so it was definitely on that community property. But who you would call from that community, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Definitely my manager didn't have any idea. Or he didn't do anything for months anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a tricky thing. But yeah, absolutely, communicating internally is probably the quickest way to take care of it, because I mean, at the end of the day, what's going to happen, even with unincorporated Sarasota County, if someone reports a violation, there's not that much they can do other than really hound you to take care of it. And that's sort of what it is. It's just, it becomes the responsibility of the community to deal with their irrigation or landscape contractors, try to get them to make that fix. And that's kind of what it boils down to at the end of the day. So I think you made the right move. Just talk to your property manager. If it comes to it, you could always reach out to your utility, see what the process is. And I can try to get the Longboat Keys utility information up so you guys have access to it. But we had a question in the back that I want to make sure I can get to.
Yeah, I just want to continue. Sorry. Okay, so I wanted to kind of follow up on that. So our neighbors, we're pretty good. We'll get a leak, they'll let us know, vice versa, whoever. So pretty good, a small community. But if it is, down the road a couple miles or whatever, my inclination, and Carolyn, you could give a heads up on this, would be to call Public Works and say, hey, there's a big geyser going somewhere. And they pretty much, it's a small town, and they pretty much have contact with everyone, each of the managers or whoever. They can drive right up and figure it out, and they know who to notify. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is a person power issue, though. It does take an effort, but Public Works is like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the go-to group if you ever see anything like that. So
very good to know. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm very familiar with like the mechanisms of Sarasota County utilities because I, for the most part, work for them. They employ me. So I still am learning about some of like the nuances and contacts for all of these different municipalities in the county. So very good to know. Contact Public Works. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, complaints?
Well,
All right. Well, thank you so much.
We really appreciate you being here in your presentation.
Absolutely. And again, help yourself to brochures. If you haven't already signed in, that would be really helpful. And we do have that little QR code if you want to give us some anonymous demographics data. No pressure. It just helps with securing that federal funding. So we always got to ask, and we really appreciate it when we get it.